Thank you very much for those member statements. We'll now move on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question's for the Premier. On August 29th, we learned about a young woman from Truro who was the victim of an alleged sexual assault. This young woman, in need of care and support, went to the Colchester East Hants Health Care Centre, where she should have been safe, where she should have been cared for. Instead, this young woman, with tears streaming down her cheeks, was turned out into the street with 2 pamphlets representing the sum total of support she received from the healthcare system. She was not examined, she was not counselled, and she was not cared for. I know the Premier must find this unacceptable. My question for him is, who is responsible for this tragic gap in the support network?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is right. This is completely unacceptable, Mr. Speaker, that a Nova Scotian is going into our institutions looking for health care and being put on the street with pamphlets. Mr. Speaker, the trauma that was inflicted on this Nova Scotian should have been treated with the care that it deserved. The Minister Department is finding out, Mr. Speaker, who is responsible for the treatment that this young woman received.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Truro is the 3rd largest community in Nova Scotia. I can't believe there would not be a sexual assault nurse examiner at this hospital. But I don't have to tell Nova Scotians that their access to health care is declining in this province, and I certainly don't have to tell rural Nova Scotians. This poor young woman had to walk out of the emergency room with sexual assault pamphlets in view of everyone else that was sitting there. Thank God her mother knew to take her to another hospital where she would receive the care needed. Can the Premier explain how the Colchester East Hants Health Care Centre is not part of the sexual assault nurse examiner program?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member would know we continue to expand that program. Just recently there was a hire in Yarmouth. There's one in the Valley. We're working with our healthcare institutions to ensure that we provide that service across our communities. I agree with the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, that service should be provided in Truro at that hospital, and we're going to continue to work with our partners to make sure that we continue to expand that service across Nova Scotia so that all Nova Scotians have access to it.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Premier for that answer. However, the mother of this young woman drove her daughter an hour and 15 minutes to St. Martha's Hospital in Antigonish. In doing so, they drove 35 minutes past the same program at the Aberdeen Hospital, because the staff at the ER couldn't even tell this young woman where the next closest same program assistance was. On what could have been the worst night of this woman's life, she turned to the healthcare system for help, and the system failed her. They failed to examine her. They failed to care for her. They failed to comfort her, and they even failed to tell her where to go for help. Can the Premier tell this House why any Nova Scotian should trust that service they need? When will there be a service when someone needs it?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would tell all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, when they require healthcare services to go to the closest emergency room, Mr. Speaker, and the very incidents the honourable member is talking about. I said in my very first answer, the department is looking into this. The treatment this young lady received is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker, and we will look to find out what happened.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
This spring and summer, there has been rising concern around the province about the situation in nursing homes. People have passed away from bed sores, an entirely preventable condition, and advocate organizations as well as care providers have been speaking out. The government has requisitioned statistics from institutions about incidents of bed sores and has now implemented a review of the quality of care in nursing homes. So I'd like to ask the Premier, in light of all of this, if he thinks now that it would have been better had the government not taken that $5 million out of the funds of nursing homes over the last 4 years.
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the honourable member for the questions. He knows over the last 4 years we've continued to reduce the long-term care wait list that had grown under the NDP government when they were in power. He knows, Mr. Speaker, that we've heard from...
Order, please. The Honourable Premier has the floor.
We've heard from, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians who are concerned about the care some of their loved ones have been receiving. Well, we now have a group of experts in the field to come together to go out and reach and collaborate with the members who are providing this service to our communities, Mr. Speaker, and we look forward for that report coming back.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
The convening of the expert panel underscores, Mr. Speaker, my point. For some time, the government has contended there is no need for alarm. Everything in our nursing homes is as it should be, despite the escalating crescendo of concern there has been around the problems. One does not appoint a panel for something that they don't think there's been a problem about. And so clearly, we see now that the government has recognized, has had a change of heart, and is seeing the matter differently, that there is a problem, that people have been right about this. In light of this evident change of heart, then, I would like the Premier to address the question, wouldn't it have been better in the first place if the government hadn't taken $5 million out of the funds of nursing homes over the last 4 years?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I look forward to a report coming back. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to them going out, talking to the experts in the field. Mr. Speaker, if there's required funding to go into the program, it will become part of our budget process. Why we asked them to have the report back by the end of November, becomes part of the ongoing budgeting process that we do inside of the province. Mr. Speaker, and I want to assure the honourable member that if there's money required to go into the system, the money will go in, but I also want to tell the honourable member it will be targeted towards services for Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party on his final supplementary.
I have not spoken with a single nursing home administrator in the province who doesn't feel that their mission has been compromised over the last number of years by the reductions in nursing home funding in the province. I've also not spoken to a single employee of a long-term care facility anywhere who's not felt the same. I therefore think it is very unlikely that the expert panel on long-term care is going to come to any different conclusion. And so I want to ask the Premier, if the panel comes back with a recommendation that the $5 million that has been taken away over the last 4 years from nursing home funds should be reinstated, will that recommendation be honoured and that money put back?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, I look forward, Mr. Speaker, to the report when it comes in. What I've said to the honourable member, any investment we make, Mr. Speaker, in long-term care will be targeted towards specific programs and services for residents of those programs, Mr. Speaker, to support them.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question's for the Premier. Does this government understand that there are tens of thousands of Nova Scotians without a family doctor? The locum program is in chaos. Specialists are leaving. Yet this government refuses, Mr. Speaker, to acknowledge what is right in front of them. It is a health care crisis. The people of Nova Scotia see it. There are health care protests, Mr. Speaker, in Amherst, Pictou, Dartmouth, Cape Breton, and I'm sure we haven't seen the last of them. I've met people across this province who can't figure out if this government is ignoring the problem or just doesn't know how to fix it. So how much longer does the Premier plan to deny that there is a health care crisis?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for her question. As she would know, across the entire country, Mr. Speaker, there's issues around attracting and retaining health care professionals. Mr. Speaker, we've continued to recruit. We brought 160 into our province. I'm very proud. Mr. Speaker, we're the only Canadian province to put in place a new immigration stream that we've attracted 10 physicians at this moment in time. There's others who are looking to come through that stream. We're continuing to work with communities across our province to provide them access to a primary health care team. We're going to continue to do so, Mr. Speaker. The problem and the biggest challenge, Mr. Speaker, is we're dealing with the fact that the healthcare system had been neglected by previous governments, unwilling to make tough decisions to move this forward. And we're looking forward, Mr. Speaker, to the support as we continue to modernize the infrastructure inside of this province to help retain and attract those much-needed healthcare workers.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I agree with the Premier. They have been neglected. We read in the news today that more than 56,000 Nova Scotians are on the wait list for a family doctor. And we've heard from Nova Scotia Health Authority officials that the list only represents those looking for a doctor. The number is actually more like 100,000 or more. That list grew by more than 1,700 net new patients looking for a family doctor in the month of August. That same month, there were more than 3,100 hours of ER closures across this province, and the province doesn't even have a lead doctor recruiter anymore. Will the Premier please acknowledge the full extent of this healthcare crisis so we can trust that he understands the problem?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to again thank the Honourable Member for the question. I want to thank, Mr. Speaker, our partners are working hard to ensure that we continue to attract healthcare providers across the province. I want to thank all those healthcare providers who reached out to us when we talk about modernizing infrastructure. We want to be part, Mr. Speaker, of moving towards a more progressive delivery of healthcare in this province. We're going to continue to work with them to modernize the system. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, we're going to compete with other Canadian provinces and in other places internationally looking for healthcare providers to come to work and live in this province, Mr. Speaker. And we're going to continue to tell them why it's positive to work here, Mr. Speaker.
Order,
We've
please.
modernized.
Order, please. The Honourable Premier has the floor.
Speaker, we're going to continue to go out and promote and tell them that we're modernizing the infrastructure in this place. They can work. We're putting them in collaborative care centres, Mr. Speaker, and they can work in communities from one end of this province to the other, Mr. Speaker, that are welcoming and want them there, Mr. Speaker, and they have a government that wants them to come to this province. No matter how negative the opposition can be about this system, it is a positive system for Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. Several times over the course of the past year, I have asked the Minister about the status of New Waterford Consolidated Hospital. Each and every time I asked if residents should expect their hospital to be closed, the Minister would not give me a direct answer. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister please tell the House exactly when he made the decision to close New Waterford and Northside hospitals?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can confirm to the member opposite that each and every time the question was posed to me, and I responded that there had been no decisions as to the future direction of those sites. Was factual at those.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Health.
That those were accurate and fully complete responses to the questions that were posed, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on June 25th, the Premier and the Minister of Health turned up in Sydney to announce their plans to close the New Waterford and Northside hospitals. Community members, doctors and nurses were informed of the announcement 12 hours in advance and were given no opportunity to provide feedback or voice concerns. And doctors have said this on live CBC radio interviews. They had not been consulted. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister, should other Nova Scotians expect the same standard of consultation when their hospitals are on the chopping block?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member would know, that there were clinicians that were involved in providing input and feedback into the decision that we've made.
Order, please. I'd just like to remind all members that we have already quickly exceeded my tolerance for the lack of respect for this chair. So if I have to speak order again, we'll begin to reduce the numbers in the chamber. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, as I said, when we made the announcement, we also made it very clear, Mr. Speaker, that more detailed consultations and engagement as the functional planning, that is the detailed planning, Mr. Speaker, as to the restructuring of the services within those communities affected in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality part of the province. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, my question is also to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, my office can barely keep up with the calls from Cape Bretoners concerned about how this government has systematically dismantled the healthcare system in our region. Over the past year, I brought their concerns to the floor of this legislature, only to be given the same old unbelievable talking points by this Minister of Health. I've asked the Minister repeatedly and specifically about the future of the Northside General. He has deferred, he's talked around the issue, and has been intentionally vague. Mr. Speaker, we found out in June now why. Members of this tight-knit community deserve a healthcare system they can count on in their time of need. So my question to the minister is, why has the minister not been forthright and straightforward with the great people of Cape Breton concerning the closure of our hospitals?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very happy to hear the member opposite and I are in agreement that the residents of his community in North Sydney deserve to have a system they can, healthcare system they can depend on in the time of need. And Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what the announcement we made in June is all about.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to hear that from the minister. On numerous occasions, I had asked if he would come to Cape Breton to attend health rallies so he can inform the great people of the North Side and Cape Breton his government's plan for the hospitals. Residents now know why the minister was a no-show at these events. When the minister finally did come to town, he sat behind the Premier, hiding in the shadows, not saying a word as the Premier delivered a crushing blow to our healthcare system. The minister then made, Mr. Speaker, a quick run for the causeway. So my question to the minister is, why to them is, now that he has had a few months to review the department's plan for the region, will he now come to Cape Breton and face the great people of our island and in specific detail lay out the government's plan for this so-called better healthcare system?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you.
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount will come to order. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I'd indicated, the plan and the direction that we're pursuing in that part of the province, Mr.
Order,
Speaker.
please. The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount will excuse himself for the balance of question period. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The plan was provided, Mr. Speaker, including the commitment that the next phase of the work, Mr. Speaker, is pulling together the detailed plan for the functional operations of the changes, Mr. Speaker. That work is ongoing and includes engagement with frontline healthcare providers. Thank you.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, when the House met last, we were in the immediate aftermath of the government's failure to protect personal information. Now let's take a few moments to review. The breach occurred over 3 days at the beginning of March. It went undetected after a month later when a provincial employee stumbled across it, noticing they were able to access information that they shouldn't. And the next day, the province learned that there had been a breach of over 7,000 non-public documents, but didn't inform the Privacy Commissioner until the following Monday. And finally, they sent a battalion of police officers to raid the house of a teenager that they said were responsible. So my question to the Minister of Internal Services, 5 months after the breach was discovered, are we any closer to knowing who's responsible for the mess?
The Honourable Minister of Internal Services.
I'd like to thank the member for the question, Mr. Speaker, and would like to reiterate that the purpose of asking both the Auditor General and the Privacy Officer to do independent reports is to find out what has happened or what took place in this instance, and I look forward to hearing back from both of them on their reports.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, we in the opposition have been trying to get the topic in front of Public Accounts Committee, but the government refuses to allow it. We've extended the government has extended the contract of the software provider even after the breach was detected. They spent the entire time we've been away from the legislature desperate to talk about anything else. Meanwhile, the FOIPOP portal remains shut down. Now, at the end of the summer, 2 days before we reconvene here in the House, they managed to get the site half up and running. So can the minister please inform this House and all Nova Scotians when they can expect a full, safe, full-functioning FOIPOP portal?
The Honourable Minister of Internal Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to assure the member that our timeline in terms of getting up a secure site is making sure that we've done the testing necessary to mitigate risk.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, my question through you is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, if only the FOIPOP portal was the only problem that this government had with protecting the private information of its citizens. Over the summer, we learned that a pharmacist was able to access protected medical files that were had no legitimate reason for reading. Files on their neighbours and other members of that community. Files that held private information about the condition and the medications they were taking. The College of Pharmacists has taken disciplinary action against this individual, but the pharmacist in question received no consequences from the province because of a loophole in the law. So my question, Mr. Speaker, is will the minister move immediately to change the Personal Health Information Act so that investigators have the time they need to investigate and lay charges in cases like this one in the Valley?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member noted, there was an investigation. The department pursued, indeed, went above and beyond our obligations, Mr. Speaker, by engaging the privacy review officer to also conduct an investigation, provide feedback and recommendations to the department on things that we can do to improve both the systems, but also, Mr. Speaker, our responses in terms of how we proceed in investigations as well.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Well, I'm sure that's of little comfort to the people in question, Mr. Speaker. I think back to the question my colleague from Argyll-Barrington just asked. On one hand, a teenager wanders through a gap in the FOIPOP security and gets arrested for it. On the other hand, a pharmacist with malice intent accesses private information to use against the people in her life and doesn't face any criminal charges. The message is clear, Mr. Speaker. Access information that embarrasses a neighbour and you're fine. Access information that embarrasses this government and the SWAT team will end up at your door. Mr. Speaker, can the minister explain why Nova Scotians should trust this government with their private medical information when there are no real consequences for stealing it?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Happy to inform the member opposite, indeed all members of the legislature, that there have been a lot of advances throughout the years in information technology in many industries, but in particular in the healthcare system, Mr. Speaker. The advances in this technology allows for the sharing of health information amongst healthcare providers, Mr. Speaker, which provides more timely and more appropriate care for all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. So we're proud of these systems that are in place, and the technology also allows for the auditing so that when there are concerns that are raised that we've become aware of, Mr. Speaker, we're able to investigate, identify and take appropriate action.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
On June 25th, Black Monday for healthcare in Cape Breton, the government announced a unilateral decision to close those two hospitals without any public dialogue, with any meaningful local consultation, and on such short notice that a number of affected physicians had to get to the announcement in their scrubs. Yesterday, the Premier characterized the opposition to this decision as noise. Now, the Premier is responsible for the standards with which the work of the government is conducted. And so I want to ask him, in his view, has his government's conduct about the hospital closures in Cape Breton met his personal standard of according respect?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member for the question. What I was referring to yesterday, Mr. Speaker, was the noise that accompanied that event where I was, Mr. Speaker. As he would know, I'm sure he would have seen the coverage of it. There was a number of people there who were not happy with the decision taken. I want to tell the honourable member that there was engagement with people in the island, healthcare providers, Mr. Speaker. I also want to tell the honourable member, we know when change is coming, it's difficult for communities, but I also want to reassure the honourable member that as we transition to the new healthcare centres in those communities that are providing the care for those communities, we'll be bolstering the regional hospital, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that we continue to build modern infrastructure that reflects the realities of today, at the same time ensuring that we're creating the environment that our healthcare providers want to work in.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Just hang on half a second. So So Dr. Craig Stone, staff anesthesiologist at the 4 CBRM hospitals, receives notice that the announcement is going to take place at 8:30 that morning. The same thing happens to plastic surgeon Dr. Abdul Attia. Dr. Margaret Fraser, president of the Medical Staff Association for the CBRM, says we are essentially blindsided. What I'm asking the Premier about are the standards that he establishes for imparting a sense of respect to communities and medical communities from his government. Is it actually the case that in the Premier's view, an acceptable level of respect has been accorded to the medical community and the rest of the community of the CBRM about these announced hospital closures?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important that we recognize, Mr. Speaker, the announcement was not received unanimously by all members of the community, Mr. Speaker. I think it's also important, though, that the Honourable Member stands in the House and tells Nova Scotians that there are members of the healthcare community and broader community, Mr. Speaker, who want to see a modern infrastructure brought. I want to quote the Honourable Member, Dr. Paul MacDonald, Head of Internal Medicine and Cape Breton Cardiologist, on June 25th. This is a major improvement to help us take care of patients. I have a number of new specialists coming to our community who are going to practice critical care, pulmonary medicine, and if I bring them into a facility that is out of date, that doesn't have the equipment and the resources that they need, they're not going to stay. Quote, Mr. Speaker, I think this is a great day for Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker. I also, Mr. Speaker, think it's important that Dr. Chris Melbourne, ER Chief, Mr. Speaker, said, I think this is an opportunity that we have in Collaborative Care Centre or a better family practice centre in New Waterford and Northside. I think people will actually get better care from the type of problems they have, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. So if we're going to cherry pick quotes, Mr. Speaker, let's be accurate, Mr. Speaker, and tell the real feeling of those communities.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland South.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Education Minister. The parents of the Oxford Education Centre are upset. Students were ready to attend the fall community in their school. In the dying days of summer, they found out they had to be bused to Pugwash. To find out on August 23rd that students were going to be displaced is unacceptable when the date was found out on August 9th, as indicated at public meetings. They are upset with the Minister for lack of information, absence of updates, and the status of the school in their community at 8 years old. Students from primary up to grade 12 will now have to travel 30 minutes at the very least and split shift at Pugwash Area School. My question, will the Minister please update this House and the residents of the Oxford area what they are able to do and house the students again as soon as possible?
Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to congratulate the member on his first question in QP. Obviously, the situation in Oxford is an unfortunate one. We have a safety concern that's been brought to our attention by engineers. We currently have TIR professional engineers on site doing a full-scale evaluation of the school to make sure that all the health and safety concerns related to structure are properly assessed so we can develop a plan to address those. I know this is an inconvenience to the community. It's unfortunate, but the fact is, Mr. Speaker, that the health and safety of our kids comes first, and we need to make some difficult decisions sometimes to make sure that they are well taken care of.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland South.
Mr. Speaker, on September 4th, I held an open house meeting to hear concerned parents. The meeting lasted over 2 hours with 150 guests. They are concerned about the health and safety of the children as well. They are concerned about the busing schedules, travel times, and necessary transport for the kids to Pugwash. They're concerned about the children's boarding on the bus in the wee hours in the morning with winter months to come. They are concerned about after-school activities once you add in the extra travel time. Mr. Speaker, my second question, will the Minister commit today to having these students back in their home before the winter months fly?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. These are all legitimate concerns. Obviously, I share the members' frustration over the situation. I know this is frustrating for people in the community. We are doing our very best to fully assess the issues in that school as quickly as possible so that we can assure parents and students and staff that if we are going to return them to that school, that it is safe for them. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Transportation. I think many Nova Scotians and many Pictonians in particular were interested to learn that last year the province spent $6 million to finance the design of the new effluent treatment facility at Northern Pulp. People wonder if $6 million is just the start of the province's commitment towards the new treatment facility. So $6 million was spent up to March 31st. I wonder if the minister can update the House how much has been spent in addition during this fiscal year, and as a bonus, maybe how much is booked as a liability for the province's share of the new treatment facility plan.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Mr. Speaker, since the beginning of this fiscal year, no additional disbursements have been made in the process. The design of the effluent treatment plant is a joint effort that is going forward and is in parallel track with the replacement of the Boat Harbour facility. And will represent a huge improvement for the effluent that's exiting into the Northumberland Strait. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to redirect to the Minister of the Environment. I think public confidence in the new treatment facility is critical. To that end, it's important that everyone understand the process from both the mill and the province going forward. So to my knowledge, an application for the new treatment facility has not yet been filed. So on the one hand, you have the province spending money on a new treatment facility that the province has not yet even approved. I wonder if the minister can update the House as to when the department expects to receive an application from the mill for the new treatment facility.
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, the Honourable Member, for that question. Certainly, we are aware that there will be a submission coming forward in the near future, but I certainly can't give a date yet. You know, when we do get the submission, we will be reviewing that, and there will be a part of a huge public consultation involved with that as well. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, over the summer, I've been meeting with constituents of Queens Shelburne and hearing their concerns. Without question, the most talked about issue is the deterioration of healthcare services. Shelburne County residents are very worried about their hospital. In August alone, the Roseway Hospital emergency room was closed for a whopping 213 hours. That's almost 9 out of 31 days. So it comes as a great surprise that as of today, the Nova Scotia Health Authority is only advertising for an emergency department physician that is less than the full-time position that's at Roseway Hospital. My question to the minister is, does the minister believe a single less than full-time position at Roseway will be adequate to keep the emergency room open so residents can access the health care services they deserve?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and appreciate the member's question. As with many communities across the province that have seen emergency department closures, the Nova Scotia Health Authority is works diligently each and every week to make sure that the shifts can be covered. We, Mr. Speaker, have made changes this summer to help support their efforts by increasing the compensation for locums, Mr. Speaker, to support the temporary employees, temporary physicians to come in and provide that coverage when needed, Mr. Speaker. And we've seen good uptake of those programs.
The Honourable Member for Queens Shelburne.
Mr. Speaker, this minister and his government are setting the Roseway Hospital up for failure. Doctor shortages, continuous emergency room closures, outsourced lab testing, and many other dismantled services are affecting the viability of the hospital. My colleague from Northside Westmount stood in his spot last spring and asked these same questions about hospitals in his area. He pointed to the same signals and raised the same concerns. Now we have seen how this movie has ended for the people of Cape Breton and their hospital of Northside General. My question is to the minister, will he give me his word today that for as long as he is the minister responsible for health and wellness, the Roseway Hospital will be open, full-service hospital? Will he make that commitment?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Give my commitment to all Nova Scotians that as long as I'm Minister of Health, I will continue to work and make the decisions based upon the information that comes to my attention that we believe is in the best interest to provide the health care that meets the needs of Nova Scotians from one end of this province to the other. That's what I've been tasked to do, Mr. Speaker, by the Premier and the people of Nova Scotia, and will continue to do that.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development. When this government was rushing forward with the elimination of democratically elected school boards, they told parents to trust them, that they were fixing the administrative structure. Well, Mr. Speaker, that new administrative structure left hundreds of families scrambling to figure out how students were getting to the first day of school. Melissa Boudreau had one child whose bus to school was half an hour late, while her other child was left stranded without a bus to bring him home at all. Mr. Speaker, I know that the minister has announced a review of busing, but will he take responsibility for this complete failure to keep students safe by providing parents with clear, reliable, timely information about bus routes and schedules?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I mean, just to be clear, we know that these logistical challenges around busing are long-standing. These are not new challenges that have been brought about by governance changes to the system. However, now that we have changed the governance of the system, the province can play an active role in looking at busing policies from one end of the province to the other and ensuring that best practices are applied. And particularly, we're going to be looking at HRM. The Liberal caucus members from HRM have been very energetic in their presentation of the concerns in their communities around busing, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to be very focused on finding solutions to those parents who dealt with worry and concern over the location of their students, because we know that we need to do better. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, for all the government's fondness about talking about previous governments, the department has had months to fix this problem. Mr. Speaker, without school boards, parents no longer know who to contact when there are problems. The promised Provincial Advisory Council has yet to be appointed, and new plans for enhanced school advisory councils were released last week. Parent Courtney Rubal called Stock Transportation, who told her to call the school. She called the school, who told her to call Stock. Mr. Speaker, it does not instill confidence when something as basic as busing, getting our children to school, seems like more than this department can handle. Mr. Speaker, will the minister today provide parents with a direct line to his office that they can use to get access to accurate busing information?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Stock Transportation did provide an apology to the public yesterday for these issues that happened. Also, the Regional Centre for Education has sent out contact information to every parent that will provide them a direct link to a person in their office to answer their operational questions. I do think it's important to note that according to the region, 97% of the buses did arrive on time, but of course that's not acceptable for the group of parents that dealt with delays and the students that were on buses for longer than there should be. They should have been, Mr. Speaker, but the fact is we're very focused on finding solutions to this issue, and because of the new governance changes that we made, the province can actually play a role in improving that situation. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. We have heard many stories over the past few days about the gaps in school busing in HRM and in other parts of the province. I've heard stories, Mr. Speaker, in my community of Dartmouth East of students not getting to school on time, being 2 hours late. Even today, Mr. Speaker, students in Bedford were left at the bus stop 34 minutes at their scheduled pickup with still no bus. This is well after the first bell at their school. Mr. Speaker, my question is this. Now that elected school boards have been dissolved, can the minister please clarify for the parents of Nova Scotia who they should call when the bus doesn't show up? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians weren't contacting the governance bodies of our school boards when it came to operational challenges or logistics that they were facing when it comes to these busing challenges that we all know have been long-standing. The Regional Centre for Education has communicated contact information that's accurate to parents and school communities so that they can call that center, reach a person who can answer their questions and help them deal with the particular cases that they're dealing with. There was a number of factors that contributed to the situation this week, which did include hundreds of registrations that came in for busing at the very end of the summer. And we recognize that parents aren't thinking of registering for busing at the beginning of the summer, but of course when registrations do come in late, that does create an additional challenge to making sure that we have all the logistical issues figured out. But that said, we're reviewing best practices, we're reviewing our policies on busing, and I believe that we'll be able to improve that situation over the long run for students and families.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the third day of school, and we still don't have a functioning bus plan. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, this has been a chronic problem over the years. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, every year, around this time of year, I receive phone calls from the bus provider telling where my kids can be picked up, and my children haven't taken the bus in 5 years. Mr. Speaker, parents who don't use the service get calls, and parents who rely on busing, they get confusion and chaos. We know even yesterday there are students that waited an hour before they had to make their own arrangements getting to school. My question is this, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister please say when all eligible students will receive safe and timely transportation? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I've been assured by the region that they are working through these issues as diligently as possible to find the short-term solutions to this. I do think it's important to note that 97% of our kids did school on time and did get home on time, but that is no good news for the folks that didn't get to school on time and get home on time, and for those parents that were concerned about their health and safety. So we are very much focused on this. Our caucus knows it's an issue, and we're committed to improving that system to better meet the needs of our students and communities, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sydney River, Myra, Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. Mr. Speaker, first, I want to thank the Minister for honouring his commitment to come and visit the Myra Gut Bridge area and witness firsthand the 20-kilometre detour that has been created because of the loss of that bridge. I think having seen it firsthand, he understands the concerns of the citizens of that area. Many of the people are concerned and wondering just what is the status. I know he has told us in the past that they are working on it. I would wonder if he could give us an update.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the member opposite for the gracious hospitality provided during our tour. Promise kept, Mr. Speaker. And I was really appreciative of meeting many of his supporters in the area who were very reflective of the great nature that Cape Bretoners have as a rule. I was particularly impressed with the good condition of the roads in the constituency, which, Mr. Speaker, I can only get credit to the great advocacy that the member has provided in this House over his long tenure.
The honourable member for Sydney River, Myra, Lewisburg.
And let's hope it continues. Mr. Speaker, through you, I'd also like to ask the Minister on a very serious note. Just recently, there had been an issue where an ambulance had been dispatched and it went to the wrong side of the river. So I'm wondering if the Minister would consider having the department designate north side, west side of the Gut area, and also have the proper signage put in place and the information passed on to the appropriate emergency responders, such as the ambulances and the fire departments in the area.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I truly appreciate what the member is describing there, having visited both the east side and the west side, which took quite a drive to get around. So we'll certainly undertake to have our professional staff review that with EHS and see if we can improve the directions there to avoid that sort of thing in the future. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester, Musqueam Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. I have a constituent, a young lady who is living in such a state of distress due to multiple health issues, including agoraphobia and an eating disorder. These disorders prevent her from going to school or, in some cases, even making medical appointments. Presently, her prescription is running out and she has no way to have them refilled. On August the 3rd, my office contacted the Minister's office for assistance, and unfortunately, we have not yet heard back from them. My question is, will the Minister either contact my office or, better still, even contact the family to help her navigate the system?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the question being raised, and I appreciate that the member has done so in a way that doesn't identify the individuals. What I can confirm is actually just earlier this week, I did get to that piece of correspondence from his office, Mr. Speaker. You can look at my desk. There's no shortage of correspondence that I do have to proceed through, and sometimes it takes a while for it to get to me. But indeed, the response should have already gone out, and it's effectively, as the member requested, we'll be getting in touch with some suggestions on how to move forward in the situation. And I encourage the member, if he doesn't already have contact directly, we'll get that to him so that in cases like this, he can just pick up the phone, give a call, and might move a little faster than correspondence.
The honourable member for Colchester, Musqueam Valley.
I do appreciate that response. Just as a general comment, I really try to put myself in the position of the people that call, just so I can get a sense of how they're actually feeling. And people like this are in such a panic mode. We cannot do anything when the calls come in unless the government helps us navigate the system. So it's just as a general comment, I hope that when calls like this do come in, that the government will help us navigate the system to help these people. I really wish I could do more. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I assure the member that that's in fact every effort that I make and the team makes, as well as our partners. I'd like to advise the member, and I can provide him and other members as well after QP the contact information. The Nova Scotia Health Authority, our partners, do have patient contact reps for each of the zones to engage, to do just that, to help navigate, as well as contacts for people who have had experiences that they don't feel meet their standards or expectations, to provide that input, because all of that input does help us identify where challenges are so that we can help make better decisions, target our investments, and improve the system. And that includes, as I've said, in this case, sometimes picking up the phone moves a little bit faster than written correspondence. So again, to the member, I appreciate him bringing it forward, and we'll continue to work with him and his colleagues and all members of the legislature to work for all of our constituents.
Honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Justice. Yesterday, the Minister released an op-ed about the Central Nova Correctional Facility in Burnside. The Minister states that the individuals in the facility are in custody, I quote, because they have been charged criminally and that the community does not accept their behaviour. Mr. Speaker, the majority of those in provincial custody, almost 60%, are there on remand. They have been charged, but they have not been convicted. In the eyes of our justice system, they are innocent. Mr. Speaker, will the minister acknowledge that the majority of people held in Burnside have not been tried, found guilty, or convicted of a crime?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question from my colleague. We know that there are circumstances are very varied, Mr. Speaker, within our correctional institutions. And what I do want to share with my colleague is we have a provincial committee working now with all of the provincial stakeholders in the criminal justice system to identify and advance change that is necessary to address some of these circumstances. And one of those is the custody of those under remand, Mr. Speaker. We know there are challenges in that system, but I want to commit to my colleague and all Nova Scotians that we continue to work diligently towards solutions.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South.
I thank the minister for that answer. Mr. Speaker, yesterday a media report indicated that 5 people in Burnside have asked the court to order them released from solitary confinement. 3 of these people are on remand. One of them, Kaz Cox, has been given no information about why he is being held in solitary. He has had his lights on from 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. each day and a high-beam flashlight in his face every half hour between 12 a.m. and 8 a.m. In his handwritten application, Mr. Cox says he feels that he is being tortured while awaiting trial. Mr. Speaker, does this situation meet the minister's standard for our justice system?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate again the circumstances that my colleague is sharing. I'm not aware of the specific circumstances that she has shared, but certainly, Mr. Speaker, there are varied reasons why individuals are in close confinement, and often, Mr. Speaker, it is for their own very protection. And there are other circumstances, Mr. Speaker, that are intended to address the overall objective of security within those facilities. Mr. Speaker, it was just this past week that a matter of close confinement was brought before the Nova Scotia Supreme Court. And Justice Cody was very clear in his decision, recognizing that close confinement is an appropriate tool at times, Mr. Speaker, but a tool of last resort. And I want to table, Mr. Speaker, an article that addressed that.
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker, last weekend I was in Emerge and there were 6 ambulances backed up.
Order,
so they
please.
sent 20.
Time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. We'll now